All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to talk about a really important shift in how we think about diversity in the classroom. We're moving beyond just celebrating different cultures and toward actively challenging unfairness. We're going to dig into what anti-bias education is all about.
Okay, this quote, it really gets to the heart of everything we're talking about today. The big idea here is that bias isn't something we're born with. It's something that's learned. So, that leads us to the big question, right? If prejudice is something we learn, how exactly does that happen? Especially when we're talking about really young kids. You know, from the time they're really little, kids are basically sponges. And what the research tells us is that they don't just notice that people look different. They also pick up on all the messages, the spoken ones and the unspoken ones, that society attaches to those differences. They get it from TV, from books, from the way adults act around them.
Okay, so if kids are learning bias from the world around them, what's the answer? How can education push back against that? Well, the solution comes from a really interesting evolution in how we approach this stuff.
So, the anti-bias approach didn't just appear out of nowhere. It actually grew out of the multiculturalism movement. A lot of educators felt that just celebrating foods and festivals wasn't really enough to deal with real-world unfairness. The key difference here is the verb. Multiculturalism is about celebrating and respecting. The anti-bias approach is about challenging. It's really the difference between passive awareness and active engagement.
And that's really the core of what an anti-bias curriculum is. It's all about giving kids the tools to think critically. It's not about pretending you don't see color or that differences don't exist. It's actually the exact opposite. It's about seeing and acknowledging our differences and then actively working to dismantle the unfairness that can come with them.
And this isn't just some abstract concept, right? There's a really clear framework here, built on 4 main goals. It starts with you, with identity, helping a child feel confident in who they are. Then it moves outward to diversity and empathy for others. Then comes justice, or critical thinking about bias. And finally, it culminates in action, learning how to stand up and make a change.
Okay, so that's the theory. But what does it actually look like in a classroom? You know, day to day, especially with kids who are so young.
Right, how on earth do you teach a 5-year-old about something as huge as activism or social justice? It sounds kind of out there, but the answer can be surprisingly simple and concrete.
Believe it or not, it can start with something you'd find in any first aid kit. Let's look at this amazing real-life example from an educator named Louisa Derman Sparks, which just shows you how everyday objects can turn into these incredibly powerful lessons. So picture this. A kid in class gets a little scrape on their knee. The teacher pulls out a box of bandages and she reads the label out loud, flesh-colored. But then she asks this brilliant question, whose flesh? And the kids, being kids, get curious. They start sticking the bandages on their own arms, and almost immediately, they see the problem. The color only matches the skin of a few of the students. They decided right then and there that this wasn't fair, and they took action. They wrote a letter to the company.
And get this, it worked. The company actually wrote back. They sent a nice note and a whole box of clear bandages. Now this is huge, right? For these little kids, they didn't just learn a lesson about fairness, they learned that their voices matter and that they can literally make a difference.
And that's not a one-off thing either. In another school, a kindergarten class was doing a jump-a-thon fundraiser. They figured out pretty quick that the whole prize system was just, well, unfair. It rewarded kids whose families had more money to donate. So what did they do? They gave back their prizes and made a video explaining why the whole thing was biased.
So these stories from the classroom are amazing, right? But they're not just cute anecdotes. They plug into much bigger, much more serious issues. And this is why this whole topic matters so much. And this is where the stakes get incredibly high. When we don't address these biases early on, the consequences are very real and they are measurable. You can see it really clearly when you look at the data on school discipline.
Okay, so check this out. Federal data shows something pretty shocking. Black boys make up just 18% of kids in preschool, but they account for 48%, almost half, of all preschool suspensions. So what is going on there? That gap is just massive, and it demands an explanation.
So why? What's driving that huge disparity, especially with kids who are so young? A really important study gives us a clue, and it's not necessarily about obvious racism, but something way more subtle. Something called implicit bias.
So in this experiment, researchers had teachers watch a video of kids playing. They told them to look out for challenging behavior. Here's the catch. There wasn't any. But using eye-tracking technology, they found that the teachers spent way more time watching the black boy. It's like they were expecting trouble from him even when he was doing the exact same thing as the other kids.
And that unconscious expectation can change everything.
And listen, this justice gap isn't just about discipline, it shows up in other fundamental ways. In some communities, that crucial time for free play is getting squeezed out for more rigid, formal instruction. It even comes down to the food kids eat. Schools in wealthier neighborhoods are more likely to get fresh, homemade meals, while others get more packaged stuff. It's all connected.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The why, the what, the how. So let's just boil it all down. What's the big takeaway from all this?
The bottom line is this: nobody is born with bias. It's something we all learn from the world around us. And that means an anti-bias education is so important. It's not just an add-on, it's a proactive way to build a more equitable foundation. It's about empowering kids to not only see the world for what it is, but to give them the tools to imagine and help build the world as it ought to be.
And that really brings us to the final question for all of us. That whole bandage experiment, it started with just one teacher asking one simple question. It just goes to show you that creating change can start small. It starts with helping kids to notice and then empowering them to do something about it.